Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cutting through all the partisan noise and diving straight into the raw geopolitical realities of the current US-Iran conflict. We're basing this entirely on in-depth expert analysis, so let's just dive right in and unpack exactly how the world got to this unprecedented moment.
We've got a ton of ground to cover, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the global choke point, move to the asymmetric military reality, break down the failed business deal, explore the escalation trap, and finally, look at the impossible choice. It's honestly a fascinating look at how military strategy, global economics, and domestic politics are all colliding at once.
All right, part one, the global choke point. Let's start with the immediate crisis that experts are warning could literally collapse the global economy.
So what's the fundamental problem? It all comes down to this. Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you aren't familiar with it, this is a massive geographical bottleneck that normally handles about 20% of the entire world's oil supply. 20%. When that stops flowing, the whole globe feels it, right down to the gas pump in your neighborhood.
To really put this energy reality into perspective, think about it like this. We currently have 20 million barrels a day just trapped. Now, sure, countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are bypassing the blockade, moving about 7 million barrels a day through pipelines, but honestly, it's a drop in the bucket. To keep things running, the U.S. and its allies have been burning through emergency stockpiles. In fact, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve has plummeted to around 300 million barrels. That is a 40-year low. And here is where it gets genuinely alarming. U.S. leadership actually admitted at a recent G7 summit that global oil reserves could effectively run dry in just 4 weeks. 4 weeks. We are looking at a very fast-ticking clock before the world experiences severe fuel shortages and massive economic fallout.
Which brings us to part two, the asymmetric military reality. This naturally leads to a pretty obvious question. If the U.S. military is so incredibly powerful, why can't they just force the strait open today? Well, there's a massive disconnect here. The U.S. points out that Iran's traditional Navy, Air Force, and radar have basically been obliterated. But here's the asymmetric reality. Iran doesn't actually need them. Instead, they're controlling the strait using swarm tactics, tens of thousands of super-cheap, highly lethal drones and sea-skimming missiles, all hidden away deep inside complex mountain caves.
To grasp just how hard it is to deal with this, military experts have a great analogy. They say hunting down these hidden drone caches across a jagged 500-mile mountainous radius is like trying to find one single parked truck in an area 1.5 times the size of California. You can drop all the bombs you want, but those dispersed, hidden swarms easily survive traditional bombing campaigns.
And then the military reality slams right into the commercial reality. Think about it. A fully loaded oil tanker crossing that strait is a giant floating asset worth up to $300 million. And obviously, that's not even counting the priceless human lives on board. Because a single tanker is such an expensive sitting duck, commercial shipping companies are simply refusing to run the gauntlet against these drone swarms. It really doesn't matter what the Pentagon requests. They just won't risk it.
Okay, moving on to part three, the failed business deal. Now, there was a fleeting moment of hope recently with a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, but it fell apart incredibly fast. To understand why it failed, you have to look at Iran's ultimate geopolitical goal. Analysts point out that Iran's objective isn't just to survive this conflict. They're using this crisis to become the undisputed regional hegemon, basically the absolute most dominant military and economic power in the entire Middle East.
And this is where the massive mismatch happened. The U.S. essentially approached the MOU like a totally transactional, fee-for-service business deal. Just offer some financial incentives, get the strait open, and fix short-term gas prices. But Iran, they looked at that exact same document and saw a permanent, strategic roadmap. For them, it was about securing total control over the region, letting them set future transit fees, and solidifying a huge sphere of influence.
You can actually watch this whole thing implode right here on this timeline. Day 1, the MOU is signed? Great, right? Well, by day 3, the U.S. starts testing the boundaries, encouraging ships to quietly use the southern route without coordinating with Iran and adding new strings to frozen assets. Fast forward to week 2, Iran feels bypassed and fires on those uncoordinated ships. By week 3, the U.S. responds by resuming its bombing campaign. The whole deal just gone.
This leads us right into part four, the escalation trap. It's a crucial concept that explains how things get so bad, so fast. According to experts, the U.S. is stuck in what's known as an escalation trap.
It's this incredibly predictable dynamic where a leader tries to force a quick win in an unwinnable situation. But every single military or diplomatic move they make actually just deepens their involvement and backs them further into a corner.
If we look at an established escalation ladder, we can map exactly where we are. Step 1. Targeted strikes on leadership. We did that. Step 2. Naval blockades and retaliation. Check. We are now sitting squarely in Step 3, the global economic crisis. And analysts are throwing up red flags, warning that if the trajectory doesn't change, we are terrifyingly close to Step 4, deploying ground forces, which almost inevitably leads to Step 5, a catastrophic forever war.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the impossible choice, because time is running out.
With midterm elections looming and oil reserves draining fast, U.S. leadership is backed into an absolutely brutal corner. On one hand, you can stop the economic bleeding by accepting Iran's demands. But listen to what those are. Pay $300 billion in war reparations, permanently end all hostilities, lift every naval blockade, completely withdraw all U.S. forces from the region, and unconditionally release their frozen assets. Doing that essentially hands over the Middle East to a brand new power.
But politically, that is a nearly impossible pill to swallow. Sure, general public opposition to a war is pretty high at 55%, but within the administration's own vocal political base, the demand for a clear, definitive victory is still overwhelmingly strong. Accepting a totally humiliating strategic loss right before an election, analysts agree that's politically toxic.
So the U.S. is staring down this impossible dilemma. Option A is to own the L, formally accept a massive strategic defeat on the world stage, let Iran control Hormuz, and just brace for the domestic political collapse. Or option B, a ground invasion. Send troops to capture Iranian port towns like Yazd or Chabahar, just to get a symbolic win. But that risks massive American casualties and, according to experts, is basically the ultimate trigger for mass suicide terrorism.
It's hauntingly similar to the Vietnam War. Historians point to this quote from President Lyndon B. Johnson that perfectly captures the feeling of the escalation trap. He said, "I know we ought not be there, but I can't get out. I just can't be the architect of surrender." It's the exact mindset of an administration that knows the current strategy is failing, but is politically paralyzed from walking away.
And let's be real about the logistics here. If the U.S. actually tried to force the Strait open militarily, analysts estimate it would take 500,000 ground troops. 500,000! Given today's domestic climate, experts argue that is simply a logistical and political impossibility. So that leaves us right here with one massive question. As the economic clock ticks closer and closer to zero, will the U.S. swallow its pride and accept a completely new balance of global power, or plunge headfirst into a catastrophic forever war? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today and for keeping your focus on the facts.